Hey guys, my name's Josh. I run this Life of a Scrambler channel. So if you're new to the channel and you've just started watching these videos, check out some of the videos I've done before. Please like and subscribe because it helps. And what I'm gonna do over the next however many weeks is just passing on some of those little tips and tricks that can help you if you have a Scrambler or just any motorbike really. So for example, this week we're gonna cover off on oil changes. Pretty much most bikes all have a similar sort of oil change process, so you can kind of follow along and get the basics of getting the filter out, getting the sump plug out, all that sort of stuff, and I'm going to show you how to do that. So let's crack on and get into it. Okay, so before we get started, here's just a quick list of some of the tools that you're going to need. Feel free to just pause and list off those tools, make sure you've got them before you get started. Next, we're going to go into consumables. So you're going to need a 14.5mm sump washer to replace the one that's already in there, as well as an oil filter. It's a HF204. Also, some oil, 10W40 is my preference. Okay, so we're going to check our oil level. Down on the right hand side, you've got this sight glass, and that shows you what your oil level is after the bike has been warmed up. Now this differs from bike to bike, so sometimes the manufacturer will say check it cold, but for this one it's hot. So you want the oil level to sit between the top and the bottom of this mark. Alright, so the first thing we're going to want to do is put the drip tray underneath the bike and locate where the oil filter and sump plug are. Then you're going to use the 8mm Allen key to just get that initial torque and crack the sump bolt. Now, it shouldn't be too tight, but if someone's over tightened it, you've just got to be really careful that you don't actually strip the nut. Once you've got just the initial tension undone off the bolt, it should just be finger tight. You shouldn't have to wind it the entire way with the Allen key. You should just be able to undo it with your hands and get it to a point where it's just about to drop all the oil. Now you can see I'm kind of putting a bit of pressure on there to unwind the thread but not let too much oil out too early, and then once I'm ready I'll kind of let it go and obviously get oil all over myself. Now, if you really don't want oil on your hands, it's not too bad for you, but just wear some gloves. I just sit the bike there and let it drain out all the oil until it's all done. Then, once it's kind of stopped dripping oil, you can remove the oil filter. Okay, so with the removal of your oil filter, there's a number of different ways you can do it. I've got the actual proper oil filter removal tool, and that just makes it really easy for me to just undo, and then I just wind it off by hand for the rest of the way. Now, it's going to leak oil everywhere again, and it's going to be quite slippery, so just be aware of that, and if you want to wear gloves, make sure you do that. Now, the second way to remove an oil filter is a little bit more dodgy, but just make sure you've got a spare handy because you can basically ruin your filter doing it. You stab a screwdriver into one side of it and use the screwdriver just to kind of crack the tension of the thread off, and then you can undo the rest of the filter by hand. Now, you're obviously not going to be able to torque up the new filter properly if you use that method, and obviously don't stab a screwdriver into your new filter to do it up, because that's just going to make it leak oil everywhere. Okay, so the next step is just to prep your new oil filter. What you're going to do that is obviously remove the plastic packaging that comes over it, and then you'll fill it up with some fresh new oil and just kind of get it about 80-90% full. And then once you've done that, what I do is just kind of rub the rubber seal with some oil just to kind of lubricate it and help it sort of seal up against the body of your bike when you screw it on. Okay, so you're going to fit the new filter by hand. I just kind of make sure that I don't tip too much oil out of it. Then I put it up onto the thread and then screw it in by hand until it's relatively tight and I'm sure it's not going to fall off. And then I just get the tool and start to tighten it up with the ratchet. Now, one important thing to note is that you need to make sure that you torque it up right. So if you can, get a torque wrench and set it to 10 Newton meters of torque for this bike. Because if it's under tight, it can potentially fall off while you're riding. And if it's over tight, it's going to be really hard to remove down the track. Okay, so the next step is just to put in your sump plug. Make sure that you screw it in nice and tight. Make sure you replace the crush washer, because they're designed to crush when you tighten it up to the torque spec, which is 25 Newton meters. So once they've been used once, they're pretty much not usable again. In a pinch, you might be able to, but I'd highly recommend just replacing your sump crush washer every single time. Okay, so the manual says you need 3.4 litres. However, I ended up using about 4 litres, so be prepared for that. Okay, so your two options here are a 10mm Allen key or a 10mm socket with an extension bar. Because what you need to do is actually get up and behind the exhaust to be able to open your oil filler cap. Now, it's not necessarily tight, so you can actually get it with the extension bar by hand and then just undo it the rest of the way with your fingers, like you can see I do here. And then I just basically put some rag in up under here to protect the bike from oil drips and if I accidentally spill some, so that it's just not sitting on my engine case burning off. Then, once you've got that done, get a filler neck that you're able to slot in behind the exhaust. Obviously, make sure the exhaust isn't too hot and is going to melt it. But what I do is just fit it in there by hand so that I've got the neck of the filler in there behind like that, and then I just tip the oil into it like this. Make sure that you don't tip it too fast, because what can happen is it fills up through the entire neck or funnel, and then it can overflow and just piss oil in and around all the hot parts of your engine, and then it's just going to burn off later and create smoke and mess and that sort of stuff. So once you've got about 3.5 litres in, I actually stop and then I check the sight glass just to make sure that the oil level's coming up, and you can see it about there. Once you've got it to the right level, just put the oil filler cap back in and tighten her up, and then move on to the next step. Okay, so the last step is just basically to run the bike for a couple of minutes. What that does is lets the engine push all the new oil around, and once you let it cool down for a couple of minutes after you've had it running and it's warmed up, it'll give you a more accurate reading of where the oil level is actually at. So what you want to do is just run it, stop it, and then leave it for a few minutes, and then check the oil level, which should be between those two markings. But if it's not, just keep topping it up until you do get to those levels once the bike's run and then stopped for a few minutes. But once you're at that level, you're sweet, so you can pack up. Now, getting rid of waste oil can be a bit of an issue for some people. A hot tip that I learned is that you can actually use the bottle that you filled your bike up with. You can put the old oil back into it and then dispose of that by giving it to a local auto shop. Now in Australia it's Super Cheap Auto. I'm sure there's like Auto One and all that sort of stuff in the US and Canada. So think about that and make sure you responsibly dispose of your oil. That's it for this week. Please like and subscribe the channel if you found it interesting and informative. It takes me a while to put these videos together, so I really enjoy it. But if you can help me out in some way, that'd be great. And then I'm going to be covering some stuff into the future that I'm pretty excited about, but I can't share that yet. So follow along, and in the meantime, I will leave you with the soothing tunes of the Slash Cut exhaust and 1200 Triumph engine.
you.